It had been 3 months since Derek had made a decision that changed everything. 3 months since he had given his kidney to his son, Ben. The operation was a success, and Ben was recovering well. He was only 8 years old, and doctors said the transplant would give him a much better chance at living a normal life. Derek didn't hesitate when they told him his son needed a kidney. It felt like a small price to pay for his son's future. But that decision was about to come back to haunt him in ways he couldn't have imagined. Derek and his wife, Carla, had been living a peaceful life ever since the transplant. Ben was doing well, his energy levels were back to normal, and he was already running around the yard like a healthy child again. Derek had even started to think that maybe, just maybe, things were finally looking up. One rainy afternoon, as Derek was sitting on the couch reading through some paperwork, he heard a loud knock on the door. It was an odd time for visitors, almost 4 in the afternoon, and the rain had started to pour heavily. Carla was out with Ben, running errands. So Derek stood up and walked over to the door, thinking it was probably a delivery or a neighbor needing something. He peered through the peephole, but to his surprise, there was no familiar face. Instead, a man stood in the rain, wearing a dark coat and a baseball cap. Derek hesitated for a moment before opening the door. The man didn't look threatening, but the stranger's presence was unsettling. "Can I help you?" Derek asked, his voice cautious. The man smiled faintly, but it wasn't a friendly smile. There was something unsettling about it, something Derek couldn't quite place. "I'm looking for Ben," the man said, his voice deep and steady. "Ben? He's not here right now. Who are you?" Derek's eyes narrowed as he looked at the stranger. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, just enough for Derek to see his face. That's when Derek felt his stomach drop. The man had the same eyes as Ben, the same shape of the nose, the same jawline. "I'm Ben's real father," the man said quietly, his eyes never leaving Derek's. "My name is Richard. I need to talk to you." Derek's heart raced. The room seemed to spin as he tried to process what the man had just said. Ben's real father? Wasn't that impossible? Ben had always known Derek as his father, and Carla had never mentioned anything about someone else. Before Derek could say anything, Richard took a step forward, and his voice grew more urgent. "I've been looking for my son for a long time. When I heard about the transplant, I finally found you." Derek froze. He couldn't breathe. The reality of what was happening slowly began to sink in, and his mind raced to connect the dots. There were so many questions. Why had Richard disappeared all those years ago? Why hadn't he come back before? And most importantly, what did he want now? The man seemed to sense Derek's confusion and took another step forward. "I just want to make sure Ben is okay," Richard said, his voice softening slightly. "I know you gave him your kidney, and I'm grateful. But I'm his real father, and I have a right to know how he's doing." Derek stood frozen at the door, his mind whirling. Something about the situation felt off. Was Richard really who he said he was? And why had he waited until now to come back into their lives? As the rain continued to pour outside, Derek closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process everything. He didn't know it yet, but this moment, this knock on the door, would change everything in their lives. Derek stood frozen in the doorway, staring at Richard, the man who claimed to be Ben's real father. His heart pounded in his chest, a mix of confusion, disbelief, and growing anger. This couldn't be happening. Ben had always known him as his father, and he had always thought Carla was his biological mother. They'd never talked about anyone else. Richard's gaze was intense, almost too intense, as if he were waiting for Derek to say something, to react in some way. Derek didn't know how to respond. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, trying to make sense of this sudden intrusion into their lives. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Derek finally asked, his voice shaky but firm. Richard sighed, glancing at the ground before meeting Derek's eyes again. "I can prove it," he said softly. "I can show you the records, the DNA test. I wasn't ready to be a father back then, but I want to be a part of his life now." The mention of a DNA test made Derek's chest tighten. He had never heard of this man before. Carla had always told him that Ben's father had disappeared when she was pregnant, leaving her to raise their son on her own. If Richard was truly Ben's biological father, why had he stayed away all these years? And more importantly, why was he showing up now, 3 months after Derek had given his kidney to Ben? Derek's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. He glanced over his shoulder to see Carla and Ben walking toward the house, their voices fading as they approached. Richard noticed too. His expression hardened slightly, as if he knew his moment was fleeting. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Richard said quickly. "I just need to talk to Ben. He deserves to know the truth about where he comes from." Derek was growing more frustrated by the second. "Why now, Richard? Why after all these years?" His voice rose with a mix of anger and confusion. "I told you," Richard said, his tone matching Derek's. "I heard about the transplant. I know you're a good man. I'm not trying to take over. I just want to know my son." Ben and Carla reached the front steps just as Derek was about to speak again. When Ben saw the man standing on the porch, he stopped in his tracks. "Daddy, who's that?" Ben asked, his voice innocent, unaware of the tension hanging in the air. Derek's heart clenched. Ben's question, so pure and unknowing, made Derek realize how little control he had in this moment. How could he explain this to his son? Before Derek could answer, Richard took a step forward, his gaze softening as he looked at Ben. "Ben, I'm your father." "Richard." His voice was calm, as though this was the most natural thing in the world. Ben's eyes widened, confusion clouding his young face. "But, you're not my dad," he said, his small voice trembling slightly. Derek felt a wave of anger wash over him. This man, this stranger, was claiming to be Ben's father right in front of him. Derek had raised Ben since he was a baby. He had cared for him, loved him, and even given him his kidney just to make sure he had a chance at life. And now this man was showing up, telling Ben he was his real father? Carla, who had been silent up until this point, stepped forward. "What's going on, Derek?" she asked, her voice full of concern. Derek turned to her, his face pale. "This man, he says he's Ben's biological father." Carla's eyes widened. "What? That's impossible." But Richard interrupted her. "I know it's a lot to take in, Carla, but it's the truth. I was young when we had Ben. I made mistakes. I wasn't ready to be a father, but now I am." Derek could see Carla's hands shaking, her face growing pale as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Ben, still confused, looked back and forth between Derek and Richard. "What's going on?" he asked again, his voice almost a whisper. Derek knelt down to Ben's level, trying to steady his own breathing. "Ben, this man, he says he's your real dad." Ben shook his head, his confusion turning to fear. "But, you're my dad, right, Daddy?" Derek closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath before speaking. "I am your dad, Ben. I'm your dad." Richard stepped forward again, but Derek put his hand out to stop him. "Enough," Derek snapped, his voice sharp. "This conversation is over for today. Ben doesn't need to hear any more of this." Richard's expression hardened, but he didn't argue. He glanced at Ben one last time before looking back at Derek. "I'll be back," he said quietly, before turning and walking away. As the sound of Richard's footsteps faded, Derek stood frozen on the porch, his heart racing. Ben's small hand reached for his, and Derek squeezed it tightly. "I'm not going to let him take you away from me." "Ben," Derek whispered to his son, though he wasn't sure if the words were meant for Ben or for himself. Derek couldn't shake the feeling that everything he thought he knew was unraveling. After Richard left, the silence in the house felt oppressive, almost suffocating. Carla had gone quiet, retreating into herself, her face pale and distant as she walked around, almost like she was in a daze. Ben, too, was quieter than usual, unsure of what was going on, but sensing the tension. Derek couldn't stop thinking about what Richard had said. The man had come out of nowhere, claiming to be Ben's real father. And even though Derek had never heard of him before, something about the situation didn't sit right. Why had Richard waited so long to show up? Why had he only come back now, just when Derek had given his kidney to save Ben's life? Derek sat at the kitchen table, his hands gripping the edge as he tried to make sense of it all. Carla had retreated into the living room, and Ben was upstairs playing with his toys. But Derek couldn't bring himself to join them. He needed answers, and he didn't know where to start. That night, after Ben had gone to bed, Derek and Carla sat down at the table together. Carla looked exhausted, as though the weight of the situation had already begun to take its toll on her. She stared down at her hands, twisting the napkin in her lap. "Carla," Derek began, his voice low but firm. "Who is he? Why didn't you tell me about him?" Carla flinched as though Derek had slapped her, her eyes meeting his with a mix of fear and shame. "I never wanted you to know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't think it mattered. I thought he was gone, that he'd never come back." And then, Derek's heart raced as he leaned forward. "What do you mean, you thought he was gone?" If Richard is Ben's father, then why did you never tell me? Carla took a deep breath, her eyes welling up with tears. It's not what you think, Derek. There's a lot you don't know. Richard and I were together for a brief time before Ben was born. He wasn't ready to be a father, and he didn't want to be with me. When I told him I was pregnant, he left, and I never heard from him again. I moved on, and I thought it was over. Derek's mind raced. But why didn't you tell me this? I'm Ben's father now. I raised him. I've loved him like he's my own. Carla's voice broke as she looked at Derek. I know, Derek. I know you've always been there for him. But Richard, he's been trying to come back into Ben's life for a long time. I just didn't want to cause any more pain, especially after everything we've been through. Derek's chest tightened. He was angry, confused, and hurt all at once. And you didn't think I should know about this? That I have a right to know? I was afraid, Carla admitted, her voice trembling. Afraid of losing you, afraid of losing Ben. Richard is his biological father. And I thought if you knew, you might leave. I didn't want to lose everything. Derek ran a hand through his hair, trying to calm himself. But why now, Carla? Why after all these years? Carla looked down, her eyes avoiding Derek's. I don't know. I didn't expect him to come back. He disappeared after Ben was born, and I never thought I'd hear from him again. I moved on, Derek. I thought you and Ben were all I needed. Derek could see the pain in Carla's eyes. He could tell that she was just as lost as he was in all of this. But the more he thought about it, the more questions he had. Why had Richard disappeared? Why hadn't he tried to contact Ben earlier? And why was he suddenly showing up now, just when? Ben had received a kidney from Derek? I don't know what to think, Carla, Derek said, his voice low. I'm not sure who I can trust right now. Carla's voice was quiet but desperate. Derek, I love you. I never meant to hurt you. I just didn't know how to tell you all of this. I was scared. But you have to believe me. I want to be with you. I don't want Richard in our lives. Derek closed his eyes, trying to process everything. It was too much. He had spent years building a life with Carla, raising Ben as his own. And now everything felt like it was falling apart. Richard's sudden appearance had turned their world upside down. And Derek didn't know how to fix it. The room fell into silence again. And Derek's thoughts turned to Ben. His son, his real son, was caught. In the middle of all of this. What would Ben think when he learned the truth? Would he hate Derek for not telling him sooner? Would he want to go live with Richard? I don't know what to do, Derek whispered. More to himself than to Carla. I can't just pretend this doesn't matter. I have to protect Ben. But I don't know how. Carla reached across the table, her hand trembling as she touched Derek's. We'll figure this out. We'll get through this, together. But Derek wasn't so sure. He had no idea how they would get through this. All he knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. The following days were a blur for Derek. Every time he tried to focus, his mind would drift back to Richard, the stranger who claimed to be Ben's real father. Derek couldn't understand why Richard had waited so long to show up. If he cared about Ben, why had he abandoned him in the first place? And now that Ben was well on his way to a full recovery after Derek had given him a kidney, why was Richard suddenly insisting on being part of his life? The more Derek thought about it, the more unsettled he became. Carla had apologized over and over, but Derek wasn't sure if her explanations made sense. She said Richard was a part of her past, a chapter she had hoped to close forever. But the more she talked, the more Derek wondered if there were things she wasn't telling him. Derek tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept returning to the same question. What was Richard's game? And why had he come back now? As the weekend approached, Derek knew he had to do something. He couldn't just let Richard waltz into their lives and take Ben from him. He had given up too much, sacrificed too much for Ben to just stand by and watch a stranger walk in and claim what wasn't his. On Saturday morning, Derek decided to take action. He called Carla and told her that he needed to go out for a while, that he had some things he needed to figure out. Carla didn't press him for details. She knew how stressed he'd been, how much this situation had shaken him. So, Derek grabbed his coat, slipped out of the house, and headed straight to the one place where he could find some answers, Richard's old apartment. Richard had told him he'd been living just a few blocks away. But Derek knew from Carla that Richard's whereabouts had been unclear for years. It seemed strange that Richard had been so close, yet so out of reach. He parked his car in front of the building and hesitated for a moment, unsure of what he would find inside. The apartment was on the second floor, in a rundown building that didn't match the image of a man claiming to want to be a father. Derek knocked on the door, his heart racing. The seconds stretched into eternity as he waited, but no one answered. He knocked again, this time more urgently, but still, nothing. Derek's frustration mounted. If Richard wasn't there, then where was he? He had to know the truth. He needed to find out what Richard's intentions were. Was this all some sort of game? Or was there something more sinister going on? Derek's mind was filled with a dark thought. What if Richard's sudden reappearance was a calculated move? What if he wanted more than just to be a part of Ben's life? What if he had come back for revenge, for something else entirely? As he stood there, trying to make sense of it all, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway behind him. Derek turned to see a woman approaching. She was in her early 30s, wearing a tired expression and clutching a grocery bag in her hands. "Can I help you?" she asked, eyeing Derek with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Derek hesitated before speaking. "I'm looking for Richard. He lives here." The woman's face softened slightly. "Richard? He doesn't live here anymore." Derek felt a surge of anger and confusion. "What do you mean? He doesn't live here anymore." "He told me he still lives here." The woman glanced down at the ground, as if unsure whether to say more. Finally, she looked back up at Derek. "He moved out a few weeks ago, said he was going to get things together, make some changes. He didn't leave a forwarding address or anything, but he was different when he left. Didn't seem like the same guy." Derek felt his stomach drop. "Do you know where he went?" The woman shook her head. "Sorry, no. I don't know. He kept to himself. But if you're looking for him, maybe try asking around the bar down the street. That's where he used to hang out a lot before he moved." Derek thanked her and walked away, feeling even more lost than before. Richard had moved out, disappeared without a trace, leaving nothing but questions behind. Derek had thought that finding Richard would give him the answers he needed, but now it felt like he had just stepped into a bigger mystery. As Derek made his way back to his car, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Carla. "Hey, Derek. We need to talk," she said, her voice sounding strained. Derek's mind was already reeling, but he knew he had to listen. "What's going on?" "It's Ben," Carla said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's gone." Derek's heart stopped. "What do you mean gone? Where is he?" Carla's voice cracked with fear. "I don't know. I thought he was just playing in his room, but he's not there. I looked everywhere." Derek's stomach churned with panic. "Did you call the police?" "Yes, I called them. They're coming over, but Derek, I'm scared. I think Richard might have taken him." The words hit Derek like a punch to the gut. Richard had been. Derek knew it now. It wasn't just some coincidence. Richard had planned this. He had waited for the right moment to strike. The realization was a cold, hard truth. Richard wasn't just some father trying to reconnect. He was a threat, and Derek had to act fast. The drive back to the house felt like an eternity. Derek's mind was racing, his thoughts swirling in every direction. He couldn't breathe, couldn't focus. Richard had taken Ben. There was no other explanation. The calm, steady voice Carla had used when calling him only added to the dread. Pulling in Derek's gut, she had sounded frightened, and in that moment, Derek realized that whatever control he thought he had in this situation was slipping away. He parked in front of the house, his tires screeching against the wet pavement as he came to a stop. His pulse quickened as he rushed inside, his heart pounding against his chest. Carla was pacing in the living room, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she didn't notice Derek entering the room. "Derek," Carla said softly when she finally looked up. "The police are here. They're doing everything they can, but I don't know what to think. What if Richard really took him? What if he's—" She couldn't finish the sentence, her voice breaking as she collapsed onto the couch. Derek felt a lump form in his throat, his own fear threatening to consume him. The front door creaked open, and two police officers entered, one older man with graying hair and the other a younger woman with a stern expression. Carla stood up quickly, wiping the tears from her face. "We're doing our best, ma'am," the older officer said in a deep voice. "We've put out an APB, and we're checking local cameras. But it might take some time." Derek barely heard him. His eyes were scanning the room, looking for any sign that Ben was still here, that this was all just a misunderstanding. But the reality settled in quickly. Ben was gone. His son, his world, had vanished. "Derek," Carla said, her voice small. I don't know what to do. What if this is all my fault? What if he took Ben because of me?" Derek walked over to her, kneeling in front of her with both hands on her shoulders. "No," he said firmly. This is not your fault. Richard is the one who did this. Not you. We're going to find him, Carla. We're going to find Ben. The police officers exchanged a glance, and the younger officer stepped forward. Mr. Knight, she said, addressing Derek by his last name. We need you to think back. Do you know of any places Richard might go? Any friends or contacts who might help us trace him? Derek's mind was still spinning, but one thing was clear. He had to take control of the situation. He couldn't rely on the police alone. He couldn't wait for them to put the pieces together. He needed answers, and fast. Richard said he used to go to a bar down the street. Derek replied, his voice hardening as the words came to him. Maybe someone there knows something. The older officer nodded. We'll check it out. But we recommend you stay here and let us handle it from here. This is a serious matter. Derek could see the hesitation in the officer's eyes. But he wasn't about to wait around. Not when Ben was out there, alone. Possibly with a man who had disappeared from his life for years. I'm going, Derek said. I need to do this. Carla looked at him, her eyes filled with fear. Derek, please. You can't go after him alone. It's dangerous. I have to, Carla, Derek replied, his voice low and filled with determination. Richard took my son, and I won't rest until I find him. With that, Derek grabbed his coat and headed out the door. The sound of Carla's voice calling after him lost in the wind. His car screeched down the street again, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his mind consumed by images of Richard holding Ben, keeping him away from everything he had ever known. The bar was only a few blocks away, but it felt like a lifetime before Derek finally arrived. He parked his car and stepped out into the cold night air. The dim neon lights of the bar flickered, casting an eerie glow over the street. As he pushed open the door, the thick scent of alcohol and stale smoke hit him, and the low hum of conversation died down for a moment. As a few eyes turned in his direction, Derek's eyes quickly scanned the room, looking for anyone who might know Richard. A group of men sat at the far end of the bar, laughing loudly, while a few others lingered near the pool table. The bartender, a woman with short black hair and a no-nonsense attitude, caught Derek's gaze as he approached the bar. Can I help you? She asked, her voice indifferent but not unfriendly. I'm looking for a guy named Richard. He used to come here a lot. Do you know where he went? Derek asked, his voice tight. The bartender paused, her eyes scanning Derek's face. Richard, huh? She muttered, wiping down the bar. Yeah, I remember him. He used to come in a lot, but he stopped showing up about a month ago. Haven't seen him since. Derek's mind raced. Richard had been here just a few weeks ago, which meant he hadn't left town long ago. He was close. Too close. But why hadn't Richard shown up in the last month? What had changed? Derek leaned in closer. Do you know anyone who might know where he is? Any friends? People he's kept in touch with? The bartender hesitated for a moment, then nodded. You might want to talk to a guy named Doug. He and Richard used to hang out. Doug's around here sometimes. But he's a bit unpredictable. He might know something. Derek's stomach tightened. Where can I find him? Across the street, she said, pointing outside. That alley over there. You'll find him there. Derek didn't hesitate. He turned and walked out the door, his steps quick and purposeful. The alley was dimly lit, but he could see the shadow of a man standing in the corner, his figure hunched and twitching. Derek's pulse quickened as he approached. Doug, he called. The man turned slowly, revealing a face half hidden by a scruffy beard. His eyes were glassy, distant. He looked like someone who had seen too much in his life. Yeah, Doug muttered, his voice raspy. I'm looking for Richard, Derek said, his voice urgent. He's the one I'm looking for. Do you know where he is? He took my son. Doug's eyes flickered with recognition, and for a split second, Derek saw a flash of something in the man's face, something like fear. I don't know where he is, Doug said quickly, shaking his head. I haven't seen him in days. But I heard him talking about something. Something big. You should be careful, man. It's not what you think. Derek's heart skipped a beat. What are you talking about? Doug swallowed hard. Richard. He's planning something. Something bad. He's been looking for revenge. Derek's head spun at Doug's words. Revenge? What could Richard possibly want revenge for? He had been absent from Ben's life for years, and now, when Derek had given his son the ultimate gift, his kidney, Richard was back, demanding a place in Ben's world. Was this some twisted attempt to get back at Carla? Or was there something deeper at play? Doug's eyes darted nervously around the alley, as if he were afraid someone might be listening. Derek stepped closer, trying to keep his voice steady. Revenge for what, Doug? What is he planning? Derek asked, his voice low but insistent. Doug swallowed hard, looking over his shoulder again before speaking. I'm telling you, man, it's bigger than you think. Richard's been talking about a lot of things. It's not just about being a father. He's after something else. Something he believes he lost. Derek's pulse quickened. What does that mean? What is he after? Doug shifted uncomfortably, his voice dropping to a near whisper. I overheard him once, talking to someone on the phone. He said he had a right to everything. Ben, the kidney, the family. He believes you took something from him. He's obsessed with getting it back. Derek felt his chest tighten as he tried to process what Doug was saying. A right to everything? The kidney? This didn't make sense. Derek had saved Ben's life, given him the kidney without hesitation. He had done what any father would do. But Richard wasn't just showing up as a father. He had an agenda. I don't understand, Derek said, shaking his head. Why would he want revenge over a kidney? This is insane. He hasn't been in Ben's life for years. Why now? Doug looked down, his expression darkening. I don't know all the details, but Richard's been digging into the past. He's obsessed with the idea that Ben should have been his from the start. He thinks the kidney, your donation, gave you too much power over him, that you became Ben's real father because of it. Derek's stomach churned. The idea that Richard could be so twisted, so consumed with jealousy, was unthinkable. He had been Ben's father in every sense of the word. He had loved him, cared for him, and sacrificed so much to ensure Ben had a chance at life. And now Richard was threatening to take that away? Doug took a shaky breath and leaned in closer. Listen, I've seen Richard's dark side. He's not someone you can trust. He's not here to be a father. He's using Ben. He wants to make you suffer for something you don't even understand. And you need to watch your back. Derek's fists clenched at his sides. Where is he, Doug? Where can I find him? Doug hesitated, his eyes flickering with fear. I don't know for sure, but I heard him talking about an old cabin in the woods, a place where he used to go when he wanted to get away from people. It's about an hour outside of town. That's where he might be hiding. The words hit Derek like a punch to the gut. A cabin in the woods. Richard had taken Ben, and now he was hiding out somewhere, plotting. Derek didn't have time to waste. He had to get to Ben before it was too late. Thanks, Derek said, his voice low but filled with determination. You've done enough. Doug nodded, his face pale as he backed away into the shadows. Derek didn't wait for him to disappear completely. He turned on his heel and made his way back to his car. He needed to act fast. He couldn't risk waiting for the police to catch up. If Richard really had been, then every second counted. The drive to the cabin felt endless. The rain had started to fall heavier, the windshield wipers struggling to keep up as Derek sped down the winding roads. His mind was focused entirely on one thing, Ben. He had to save him. Derek's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he scanned the dark, wooded landscape around him. There was no sign of Richard or Ben, but something in the pit of his stomach told him he was getting closer. The more he thought about Richard's obsession with revenge, the more he realized how dangerous this situation had become. This wasn't just about a father trying to reconnect with his son. This was something far more sinister. Richard wasn't going to let go of Ben without a fight, and Derek wasn't going to lose his son to him. Not now, not ever. As he turned onto a narrow gravel road, he saw a small, dilapidated cabin up ahead. The lights were off, but the silhouette of the building stood out against the dark backdrop of the trees. His heart raced as he parked the car in front of the cabin. Derek grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out of the car. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of wet earth, but he didn't notice. His focus was solely on the cabin ahead. He moved quickly but carefully, not wanting to make a sound. As he approached the door, Derek heard faint voices from inside. His heart pounded as he pressed his ear to the wooden door. There was no mistaking it now. One of the voices was Richard's. But there was another voice too. A child's voice. Ben. Derek's chest tightened as he reached for the door handle. This was it. He had to act now. He pushed the door open just a crack, holding his breath. What he saw inside made his blood run cold. Ben was sitting on the floor, his eyes wide with fear. Richard stood nearby, pacing back and forth, his face twisted with rage. I won't let you take him from me, Richard was saying, his voice low but filled with venom. You don't deserve him. He's mine. He always should have been mine. Derek's heart stopped. He couldn't hear anymore. Without thinking, He pushed the door open further and stepped inside, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. "Richard," Derek shouted. "Let him go. Now." Richard's head snapped up, his eyes wild. For a moment, there was only silence. Then Richard's lips curled into a twisted grin. "You really think you can stop me?" Richard sneered. "You've already taken so much from me. It's time I take back what's mine." The tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. Derek's heart was pounding in his chest as he stood in the doorway. His eyes locked on Richard. The air was heavy with anticipation, every second feeling like an eternity. Ben, sitting on the floor with wide, frightened eyes, was clutching a small toy in his hands. He looked up at Derek, his face filled with confusion and fear. "Ben," Derek said softly, his voice trembling but firm. "It's okay. I'm here." Richard's wild eyes never left Derek, the look of rage slowly twisting into something darker, more sinister. He took a step closer to Ben, his voice cold as he spoke. "You think you can just walk in here and take him from me?" Richard spat, his hands balling into fists. "You think you're the better father? That you deserve him more than me? I was the one who gave him life. You just took my place." Derek's jaw clenched. The words cut deep, but he knew now that Richard wasn't going to listen to reason. This wasn't about fatherhood or love. It was about control. About Richard wanting what he believed was rightfully his. "I don't care what you think," Derek said, his voice rising with determination. "Ben is my son. I've raised him, I've loved him, and I've sacrificed everything for him. You don't get to come in here and take that away from me." Richard's grin widened, and he took another step toward Ben, his hand reaching out in a threatening motion. "He's mine. You don't deserve him, Derek. You're just a stranger who played the part. But I'm his real father." Derek could feel his anger rising, his hands trembling with the need to protect his son. He wasn't going to let this man control Ben's life any longer. He stepped forward, blocking Richard's path, his voice cold as ice. "No, Richard, you don't get to decide that. I am his father, and I always will be." For a moment, there was silence, just the sound of the rain falling heavily outside and the pounding of Derek's heartbeat in his ears. Richard's eyes narrowed, and then, with a swift movement, he lunged toward Ben. Derek's instincts kicked in. Without thinking, he grabbed Richard by the arm, pulling him back with all his strength. The force of the pull sent Richard stumbling, but he quickly regained his balance and turned to face Derek, his face twisted with fury. "You think you can stop me?" Richard shouted, his voice full of venom. The two men struggled, each trying to overpower the other, their grunts filling the small cabin. Derek's mind was consumed with one thought. He needed to protect Ben. He couldn't lose him. Not to this man, not after everything he had done to keep him safe. Richard was stronger than Derek had anticipated. His muscles strained as he tried to shove Derek away. But Derek fought back with everything he had. The sound of shuffling feet and the rough tug of bodies against the cabin walls echoed in the cramped space. In the chaos, Derek heard Ben's voice, a small, frightened whisper. "Daddy, please." The sound of Ben's voice cut through the fog of anger and adrenaline. Derek turned to look at his son, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. Richard, seeing the distraction, lunged forward again. But this time, Derek was ready. With a quick, decisive movement, Derek grabbed Richard by the shoulders and shoved him back. Richard hit the wall with a thud, his body crashing into a pile of old wooden crates. For a moment, he lay there, stunned. Derek took a few steps back, breathing heavily, trying to steady himself. His eyes locked on Ben, who was still sitting on the floor, clutching his toy tightly. The fear in Ben's eyes tore at Derek's heart. "Ben," Derek said, his voice shaking with emotion. "It's okay. I'm here. You're safe. You're with me." Ben slowly stood up, his small frame trembling. He looked up at Derek, his eyes wide with uncertainty. "Daddy, is he? Is he my real dad?" Derek's heart broke. He kneeled down in front of Ben, pulling him into an embrace. "I am your dad, Ben. I will always be your dad. No one can take that from us." As Derek held Ben, he felt Richard stir behind him. The man was rising to his feet, his eyes filled with hatred. Derek turned just in time to see Richard make another move. But this time, there was no hesitation in Derek's actions. Before Richard could take another step, Derek shouted to Ben. "Run, Ben. Go outside and get in the car. Now." Ben hesitated for a moment, but Derek's command was enough to snap him into action. He ran toward the door, glancing back once before disappearing into the ring. Richard, enraged, lunged toward Derek with a knife in his hand. Derek barely managed to dodge the strike, his body moving instinctively. Richard swung the knife again, narrowly missing Derek's chest. The blade grazed his arm, but Derek didn't feel it. His focus was entirely on protecting his son. With a roar of fury, Richard swung the knife a third time. This time, Derek was ready. He grabbed Richard's wrist, twisting it until the knife fell to the ground. With a final burst of strength, Derek slammed Richard against the wall once more, holding him in place. "You're done," Derek said through gritted teeth. "You're not going to hurt him. Not anymore." Richard struggled, but the fight had gone out of him. His body slumped in defeat, and his breath came in heavy gasps. Derek stood over him, watching as the anger slowly drained from Richard's face. Derek turned to check on Ben, who was standing outside by the car, his small body drenched in rain. Derek ran to him, his heart still racing. "Ben," he called out, rushing toward him. "Are you okay?" Ben nodded, his face still pale but relieved. "I'm okay, Daddy." Derek pulled him into his arms, holding him tightly, thankful beyond words that Ben was safe. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm they had just survived. As the rain poured down around them, Derek realized that no matter what happened next, he would always protect his son. And this time, no one, no matter how much they claimed to be his father, could take him away.